Hi. In this second video, we're going to take a quick look at how do we give this text a little bit more punch by using layer effects. I'm back to my concrete image here, and I love the way the letters sort of stand out against the more solid tones. So example on the left here, the C-O-N, really bold, really nice. But some of these letters are a little hard to read, and I just want to give them a little bit extra oomph. To do that, I'm going to create some layer effects that I can add to my text layer. So first I want to select my text layer in the layers palette. I just click on it once so it's highlighted. And down near the bottom, there's a little icon that says FX. They actually call these layer styles, but they use the effects shortcut or symbol. So I'm going to click on that, and a little pop-up menu appears with some options. You could give all of these a try, of course. I'm going to start with a drop shadow. I think a drop shadow is a nice way to just add a little bit of contrast between the letters themselves and what's going on in the background. When you choose drop shadow, you're going to get this window that pops up that says layer style. And actually, all of the styles that were in that pop-up menu are here, and you can choose and add as many as you think would be helpful. I've got my drop shadow. It is previewing in the image here. You can see on the layer style window, there's a little checkbox for preview. I can turn it off if I want to see what sort of like, what did I have before and what do I have now? And is that an improvement? Now, by default, usually the drop shadow comes up as a black, right? Like a traditional shadow color. It does not have to be. If I really want this to be sort of a more of a bold red, or let's see, maybe a dark purple would be appropriate for this. I can change that shadow color. Below the color, you're going to see opacity. You know, how intense do I want this shadow to be? Just barely there, or like a really strong, kind of like the strong shadow on this one, really makes the T and the E and these lighter letters pop out on the right-hand side. How far away from the letters do I want it? You know, think about the sort of three-dimensional illusion that you're creating. The farther the shadow is from the object, the further the object appears from its background. Now, of course, there's a place where this all begins to disconnect and doesn't actually look realistic. So be careful how far you go. But, oops, I wanted my opacity up, but I'm going to change my distance back. I like it better when they're sort of underneath those letters and they're really helping the letters to, they're giving contrast to the letters. Spread is sort of like how much of that shape is going to be filled in and how much of it is going to be fade. And so you can see as I bring the spread closer to 100%, I get a really hard edge. Definitely cool, has its own special effect there. I like that. But if I'm just going for some shadow to make this a little more readable, I might go down something under 20%. And size, you know, really big blur gives a really soft shadow. If I make it smaller, I get a much harder edge. Okay. All right, so that's the drop shadow. You can definitely try using other layer styles here to add more interest. Some of the other ones that I think are really effective are the color overlays, the gradient overlay, and the satin. So I'll do a gradient overlay here. I'm going to click on gradient overlay, and then I will go to that, click on the words gradient overlay. Like I do the checkbox, and then I click on the words, and that brings up the options over here. Now, the gradient right now is just a big white. It's white to white. I don't want that. I'm going to double click on the right-hand side where it says gradient to pull up my gradient editor. In the gradient editor, I have some presets. So if I have an idea of what I might want, I can click on one of these presets and maybe that gets me close. Or I can use the two, they call these stops, little stops at the bottom of my spectrum to choose colors that I want. So let's see, I'm going to double click on the purple color stop on the left. And I can choose a color in the color picker, but I can also come to my image and choose a color there. I'll also do the one on the right. So double click on the little square. I'm going to choose something from my image. Click OK. And let's do one more in the middle here. Light. There we go. Okay. Now, the thing about the gradient is right now, that gradient is completely filling that text, and I have lost the image in the text. If I want that image, I need to adjust my opacity or my blend mode. So opacity is, how transparent do I want that gradient to be? Blend mode, of course, is just like our layer blend modes. So we have normal and let's say multiply. Well, that's kind of nice. Screen really brightens it up. You have to think about what is it you're trying to accomplish? What do you want this to feel like? Okay. So I now have this gradient. I've got my drop shadow. I've got my texture. I've got a lot going on in that image, or in the inside the text, the image in the text. Now, if I'm thinking about this as a composition, I just need to think a little bit about, like, is my background what I want it to be? If I add an adjustment layer right above the background. So remember that adjustment layers affect everything below, unless they're in a clipping mask. But if I click on my background and I add an adjustment layer, the only one that's going to be adjusted is the background. So let's say I were to do something like desaturate that a little bit. Let the color in the letters really be the punchy, bright color. Again, I'm sort of adjusting this so that I'm really making the text stand out, right? Really readable, really bold. Okay. I'm going to come over to the Mars image and do just a couple things here as well. You can definitely also add layer effects or layer styles to the texture of your text. And this works especially well if you've used this technique where you've created a textured mask. So I'm going to click on the masked layer and add effects there. Let's start with an outer glow. I'm just going to zoom in so we can get a better look at what's going on here. Outer glow is a little like a drop shadow, except for that it's just all around. It doesn't offset the way a shadow does. It's equal on all sides of that layer. And in this case, that layer is the texture layer. So let's see if we can see this really well. There we go. So in this case, if I'm doing this on the texture layer, you'll notice that this orange outer glow, which I've just made really bold and hard. So I've got the opacity turned up and the spread up to 100. It is actually happening not only around the letters, but also around the individual shapes inside. If I keep this opacity up high so you can really see it, but you change my spread back and my size, I can start to really change the feeling of that texture a bit by adding these extra, it's just a glow, extra pixels around the outside, around the edges of that texture. Okay. As a contrast to that, I'm going to turn off that effect for a minute. I'm just turning off the visibility here in my layers palette. If I click on my text layer that is the background layer, so this is the one that doesn't have any sort of texture or mask on it. And I'm going to add that same effect of outer glow. Notice what happens. This outer glow goes around the pixels that are on this layer, and this layer, those pixels are just the outlines of the letters. So I get an outer glow that's just around the outside of the letters, as opposed to my textured layer where the glow goes inside the letters and around the texture. Okay. So choose your layer carefully, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. All right, and that's it for layer styles for now. Next up, a quick overview of our assignment this week.